This week on CNBC Sport, the podcast. It's pronounced paddle, not padel, and we've got the CEO of the Pro Padel League, Michael Dorfman, to talk about how paddle has transformed from a niche sport in Spain to the hottest emerging activity for the wealthiest people in America.
We've got over 35 million players globally, and that's growing exponentially from just a few short years ago.
That's next on this week's CNBC Sport, the podcast. I'm pleased to be joined by Michael Dorfman, CEO of the Pro Padel League. It is not padel.
That's right.
Just briefly, why does everyone call this padel?
Yeah, I think in the U.S. we've kind of adopted an incorrect pronunciation when the sport first got imported here. Platform tennis is popular in some parts of the country in the Northeast and Chicago. That's commonly known as paddle. So I think in order not to confuse those sports, we put a weird accent on my paddle.
And now your hope is that the confusion will go away because paddle will simply become the more popular sport between platform tennis and paddle?
I think it's fair to say, no shade against platform tennis, that it already is the more popular sport. But yes, I think.
All right, let's start there. For those who have never played paddle before, I imagine there's a fair amount of people watching or listening to this that applies to. Give me the 30-second version of how the sport is played.
Sure. So paddle is essentially a almost perfect hybrid between tennis and squash. So you have a tennis-like ball, same material and shape. The pressure is slightly different. It's only played in doubles. So you have 4 people on the court, 2 on each side of a tennis-looking net. There's an AstroTurf surface with sand laid on top, and then you're surrounded by glass and metal walls. So you're playing essentially like a doubles tennis type of game, but the walls surrounding the court kind of keep everything in play, scored very much like tennis.
And so if everything is in play, how do you win a point?
Yeah, you can force your opponent to make an error. You can smash the ball out of the court, which ends the point immediately. But you're playing basically to get the ball to bounce twice on the opponent's side of the net.
There's all sorts of racket sports we just talked about. Platform tennis, obviously pickleball has been huge. You mentioned that this is a hybrid of squash. There's tennis. Why has this sport become so popular? It seems like it would be a crowded field for a new racket sport.
Yeah, look, I think that racket sports in general are certainly having a moment. Tennis has had a resurgence. Obviously, pickleball has exploded in popularity. To me, paddle is like a Goldilocks type of racket sport where it is very technical and hard to master, but it is easy enough to enter the sport that it's enjoyable to play within your first couple of times getting on the court. I think the team element is really important. You're only ever playing in doubles as a team, so it's a foursome on the court at all times. I think that makes it social, engaging, and for a lot of young professionals, I think it's become like a new form of golf.
And so that people understand, give me your quick elevator pitch in terms of statistically, just how popular has this sport become?
We've got over 35 million players globally, which is a huge number, and that's growing exponentially from just a few short years ago. And in countries like Spain, for example, paddle is the second most popular sport after soccer or football. In the U.S., it's much more nascent. However, when we started the Pro Padel League in 2023, I think we were sub 50 courts in the entire country. Now we're over 1,000. I think there were single-digit thousands of players that at that point in time, and now we've just passed 1 million. So that gives you a little bit of a sense of the trajectory that we're on.
And so has Spain provided a guide for you at all in terms of how you make this recreational sport into something more professional? Like, is professional paddle popular in Spain?
It is. This is sort of the first gen, I would say, of sort of the spectator side of the sport becoming a thing. Paddle kind of grew up as like a leisurely cousin to tennis, and it was like something that all the tennis players would play after they were done kind of with their serious practice. Now we've got a generation of athletes that have grown up trying to be the best at paddle that they could possibly be. So because of that, we've got kind of an amazing crop of talent that people are really interested to watch kind of for the first time.
And so similar to how I asked you for the quick pitch of how the sport is played, let's move on to to the league, which is your business. There are 10 teams, but maybe just give people a quick synopsis of how the league works.
Yeah, so the Pro Padel League is essentially a F1 style circuit with city-based team franchises. Each city franchise has both a men's and a women's team that are competing both in their own individual standings for men's points and prize money, for women's points and prize money, as well as the Cities Cup, which is sort of the accumulation of points from both the men's and the women's side.
And how much are players getting paid? How does compensation work in general? Because you guys just raised Series A, $15 million. I'm assuming quite a bit of that compensation will go toward paying players, correct?
Yeah, so we've raised now $25 million in capital over the life of the league. A lot of that is going to scaling the calendar and creating kind of a new form of racket sports, I think, compensation for athletes. So they're multi-pronged in how they get paid. One is by the teams, so they have kind of a guaranteed appearance fee for showing up for the season over a single or multi-year basis. Then there is prize money on the individual tournaments that they can win based on their placement of, we just had our New York event in Hammerstein Ballroom. We have our LA event in Barker Hangar in a couple of weeks. Based on their finishing position in that individual tournament, they're eligible for prize money. And then there is finals championship prize money that's awarded both to the players and the teams. And
so what is the average player paid?
They could be from, below 100K-ish salaries, I think, on a event-to-event base. What is clear, this is a growing ecosystem. I think the salary bands that we have set up, we have the most highly compensated players in padel globally. That is going to be still today a fraction of where it will be with the growth of the sport. But they are making just enough right now, I would say, to full-time build themselves up as professional padel athletes. We want to make that, build that platform for them.
So are most of the athletes doing this as a full-time job?
Yes, I would say the top athletes are doing it now completely full-time. I think the ones that are trying to make it, you still see some of them, working in local clubs, giving private lessons, doing exhibitions and clinics, but that is our stated goal, is to make this a full-time job and with high earning potential for all of our athletes.
And so you mentioned it was sort of F1 style, but like in terms of the teams, how does the scoring work?
So for our teams, we start each event with a group stage on Thursday evening. Each team plays 2 matches, at which point the top 4 teams will advance to podium day on Sunday to play 1st through 4th. There are then points awarded 1 through 10, very much like an F1 kind of race. And those points from each event get stacked up to qualify for the Cities Cup.
And how many players per team?
Rosters range from 4 to 8 players. So you have your 2 starting men, your 2 starting women, and teams can opt to have reserve players behind them.
Okay. And then each team has its own individual ownership.
That's right.
Right. And can you kind of walk me through the rise in valuations of these teams? Because it's been almost mind-bogglingly astronomical. Yes.
Yeah. I think we've publicly said our first handful of franchises sold for $200,000 in 2023. We've got several marks in the double-digit millions of dollars for teams right now, which has been great to see, the validation and the quality of the ownership groups that are coming into the league. I think that's still a long way to go for where we see the league going.
Why is this happening?
People are obsessed with padel. I think and sports franchises are scarce assets. And I think the property that we're building is not just an addictive sport from a participatory standpoint. I think people see real potential upside in the media property and the experiential nature of the sport.
So let's talk about the media property, because for most pro leagues, that's kind of the heart of the revenue of the business. You guys struck a deal with USA Sports, part of the Versant, our parent company ecosystem. And in fact, several of your matches will appear, one's already appeared, will appear live on CNBC which is new for you guys, first time that's ever happening, and now it's also kind of a way in for more of these live sporting events for CNBC, which is something CNBC is dabbling with over the weekends. Why did you guys decide to go with Versant? And it's 5 events that you're running.
That's right.
From a live standpoint, did you have multiple media partners that you were considering and decided to go this route? And sort of what was the thought process behind that?
Yeah, I think that having a live national broadcast for the first time for our league was kind of a huge moment for us that we just pulled off a couple of weeks ago. We were really excited about the partnership with CNBC, I think, first and foremost because of the overlap in demographic with who's playing paddle today. I think the data that we've just gotten back proves that we've got the most affluent audience in sports. So, higher than Wimbledon, higher than the US Open, higher than F1, all the major sports, of course, and significantly higher than kind of CNBC's kind of traditional daytime audience, which was really interesting as well. So we thought that was a natural fit. We know Versant is, live sports are I think, very versatile, and Versant is trying to expand their sports portfolio, and I think paddle's a great product to put on. And
is the pitch to these owners that you feel like you will have more matches on live in the future as you grow out this media play?
Yeah, I think that the traditional sports business of kind of media rights being kind of the leading revenue driver, I'm not sure that that's the path forward for modern sports properties like us that are starting in 2026. This for us is about exposure and building a platform and community and a fan base that then we think at a certain point in the future can be monetized from a media rights perspective. But really, that's not really our stated goal right now. We want to grow the sport, get as many people watching the sport as possible, get as many people on the court as possible.
Watching
playing
in person, you mean?
Well, in person or on TV.
Uh-huh.
Just experiencing it from, whether that's on a big screen, in person, getting on the court themselves. We think all of that is additive to all the momentum we have right now. That's kind of our main priority. We think the revenue will follow later.
How many people are watching these matches in person today?
We have, depends on the market. So we have capacity somewhere between 500 and 3,500, depending on if we are in LA or Playa del Carmen.
And where is the sport most popular today?
In the US?
Yeah.
Miami is certainly the capital of paddle in the US. I think because of the strong kind of European, Latin American audience there, that's sort of where it took first kind of stronghold and has become very much a part of like day-to-day life in Miami. We're starting to see similar trends in LA, New York, Austin, Chicago, Atlanta. So it's going to be everywhere.
And you talked about how the people playing paddle are obviously on the very high affluent stage. What else do you know from a demographic standpoint on who's playing?
Yeah, I think we have kind of a tennis or golf type of audience, but typically skewing a generation younger. We see a lot of folks that played very high level college professional tennis and squash now moving into their day-to-day careers, and paddle is a great kind of way to stay in shape and keep on with their rackets.
So
without
30s? Is that what
I would say we have a largely kind of millennial audience. Gen Xers as well are super into it. I think we have like strong health and wellness trends. A lot of, as I said before, golfers I think are opting to play paddle because you get the same kind of social networking connectivity. But at the same time, our kind of highlight reel points on Instagram and TikTok go insanely viral, right? So that's touching, a much more Gen Z type of audience on social.
So is the sport competitive to pickleball, or is it complementary? Is it like a rising boats lifts all tides?
That's my view. I think all racket sports are great for all other racket sports. I think kind of the future of racket sports are clubs that have pickle, they have paddle, they have tennis, maybe there's squash, maybe there's platform tennis. And I think that having kind of a racket sport for everyone in the family is going to be a kind of the winning formula. Certainly there are going to be pockets of, paddle only or pickle only kind of purists. But for me, what we see is people starting in one racket sport very often will pick up another racket sport and enjoy it just as much.
How are you developing younger talent for these pro leagues? Has that begun already? Is there a paddle academy?
There's not. We do have ambitions to kind of create an entire ecosystem around the Pro Padel League. We launched the PPL2 earlier this year as a developmental league for North American, specifically, talent. We want to ladder that down all the way through, the first time a kid touches a racket and they fall in love with the sport. How can they improve? Where can they go? What can they aspire to? That's our goal, to build that ladder all the way up.
And I just want to know a little bit about your own personal story. Like, how did you decide this is what you wanted to do? Weren't you running an insurance company before you did this?
Yeah, I come from a kind of fourth generation insurance business that I then left to start a technology, kind of digitized version of. I was running that company when I got introduced to the sport. We sold that company because the timing was right.
And how did you get introduced to the sport?
So an investor friend of mine just brought me onto the paddle court. I had literally never heard of the sport before. I thought it was pickleball. I was a tennis player growing up, so I was very resistant.
This was a few years ago?
This was just after the pandemic.
Okay.
So call it 2021. I was extremely resistant to even getting on the court, but once I did, I fell in love with it, and I saw everyone else doing the same thing, and it became apparent to me very quickly, as someone who's invested in tech and kind of high growth industries, that just spotting the trend of, like, there are serious people spending time and money on the sport. And after observing for a while, it became very clear that there was a big business to be built here.
And you decided, I want to quit my job and be the CEO of a professional league. Like, how was that jump? How did that happen?
I don't know. You'd have to ask my wife how that actually happened, but it did. It seems crazy in hindsight, and it felt natural in the moment that every day we felt like the opportunity was getting bigger and bigger, and we needed to build a real front office that could come in and capitalize on as big of the opportunity as we thought.
And so are you at the stage now in the development and growth of this league that you are still going to people that are potentially interested in investing in sports in general and explaining what paddle is? Or is the word out at this point and it's the reverse, where the money's now coming to you?
It is both. We field a ton of inbound interest at this point. That's certainly a shift we've noticed over the last year or so. At the same time, we want to make sure we're on everybody's radar and educating the market. And even if people have heard of the sport, they may not know how to pronounce it. They may not have gotten on a court ever before. So we do spend a lot of time making sure that people are familiar, and we know that once people see our product live or get on the court, they will fall in love. We've seen it time and time again, so we want to make sure that that's happening.
Do you feel like you are benefiting from a broader overall movement where there's this base of investor capital that wants to invest in live sports right now, and this fits the bill? Like, it is a growing live sport, and it almost doesn't even matter if they've ever played the sport or not. Like, they just want in.
Yeah, look, I think coming from tech, I personally have kind of an anti-tech thesis in a lot of ways, that as the world becomes more automated, we're going to crave more and more human experiences, and sports broadly is fundamentally a human experience that cannot be automated. So I'm very bullish on the category of live events in general and live sports more specifically. I don't think that people are just blindly, I think there's a lot of kind of new types of leagues and emerging sports. I don't think that people are blindly throwing dollars at, anything that people are tagging sports with. I think paddle is uniquely a beautiful game to play and to watch. And I think that has a stickiness to it that we don't see in a lot of other sports.
What's the equipment and apparel business like? I mean, you're buying a racket, which you call a racket, not a paddle.
That's right.
Right? And then are there paddle shoes, specific paddle shoes?
Yeah, there are.
Uh-huh. And is that all you need?
It's kind of all you need.
Yeah.
I think that obviously the racket is essential. There's many brands. A lot of them are tennis and squash brands that have been making or are starting to develop rackets. I think there's a long way to go in terms of the technology there that we'll see a ton of innovation over time. There's your typical kind of tennis-like apparel, I would say, although there are people starting, paddle-specific lines of apparel. It is different in terms of the lifestyle and the culture and the look and feel. And then, as far as, kind of footwear is concerned, I think, I still play in basketball shoes because that's what I'm just comfortable playing paddle in. I think a lot of people do, but we've started to see, Nike testing shoes. We've started to see major footwear brands kind of launching paddle or thinking about paddle. So there's a long way to go there.
Michael, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.